The situation in Gaza is still tense, both for Palestinian civilians and Israeli hostages. For the Europe conversation, I catch up with Spanish Foreign Affairs Minister José Manuel Albares, who says Gaza belongs to the Palestinians and they should remain there to rebuild it. Minister, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe conversation. I want to start off with, I suppose, one of the more potentially optimistic foreign policy issues of the last year or so, and that is Syria. It's potentially optimistic. What does Spain believe is the right thing to do in relation to sanctions relief for Syria, the new regime there, without ensuring that people, for example, who have committed terrible crimes don't go away unpunished?
There is definitely a window of opportunities and above all, a window of hope in Syria. 10 days ago, I went there, I went to Damascus, and I met the new authorities. And I came with a clear idea from my conversation. First, they were ready to engage on all the points that I wanted to engage. I want an inclusive, peaceful future for Syria, guaranteeing sovereignty and territorial integrity and free of foreign interference. So Syria is undergoing right now a national dialogue conference. And a constitution must come out of that. What I want is a constitution with equal rights for every Syrian, whether it's a woman or a man, whether it belongs to an ethnic or religious minority. I had the chance to meet with women from the civil society and with representatives of the minorities. And doing that, saying that that's the way they want to engage with us, I'm favorable, and I said it in the Foreign Affairs Council, to lift gradually the sanctions, very especially those that are directed to economic reconstruction and humanitarian aid. And we must engage heavily with humanitarian aid. 90% of the Syrians live under the threshold of poverty, and 70 million of them are in risk of hunger.
Okay, so how can you be so sure? I mean, this is a really strong point you're making, that you were given guarantees, because I remember with the fall of Assad, a lot of women, they thought, well, if we have Jolani, HTS, who were close to al-Nusra Front, that women's lives are going to be under threat. And not only that, then you have much worse sectarianism. So what did they say that convinced you that they will be inclusive?
First, the new authorities were ready to engage on those subjects and to answer me. And when I was asking new explanations, they were giving them to me. And the future that they describe, it's more or less the future I think it's the best for all the Syrians. Secondly, I was able to have those meetings with women from civil society and with the leaders of the minorities without any problem. And they they spoke very openly. What they were telling me is, please engage yourself and the European Union with the new authorities. Tell them your red lines, but engage with them and lift the sanctions. The sanctions harm us. They are killing us from hunger. So all those are the things that I have shared with my colleagues, and they have got the same idea from their trip to Damascus.
I want to move on then to a much more pessimistic scene in Palestine, in Gaza and the West Bank. We see really catastrophic scenes in Gaza, starvation, the killing of children. We also heard Donald Trump saying Gaza should be wiped out. So what is the EU's perspective on this situation?
I think all throughout this war, European Union, when we see the conclusions in the Council, has been in favor of a ceasefire, has been in favor of the two-state solution, has been in favor of the release of all hostages and the unimpeded access of humanitarian aid. We have to put in place all that. There is a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, clearly. And the people of Gaza must remain there. They must live there, so we must help them. First, with humanitarian aid, in order to address their basic needs. Secondly, backing UNRWA. UNRWA is an indispensable organization of the United Nations, not only for the people of Gaza, but also for the Palestinians that are refugees in different parts of the region. And thirdly, we must help with reconstruction. And then we must give political backing as soon as possible. Gaza and the West Bank are another very worrying situation where we see violent settlers increasing the violence against Palestinians must be put under one single Palestinian authority. Because at the end, we all know what's the solution for the Middle East. A peaceful Palestine living in good neighborhood with a peaceful Israel, and we have to do everything to implement it.
But Trump, let's go back to the language he's used. He's talking about wiping out Gaza, saying that it's a beautiful real estate on the sea. He also got rid of the sanctions, the small number of sanctions from the Biden administration against aggressive settlers.
Once again, I can only speak on behalf of my government, the Spanish government, and also of what Europe does. Certainly, Gaza belongs to the Palestinian, and it's the people living in Gaza, the Palestinians living in Gaza, that must remain there, and we must help them to rebuild a new life. And of course, we must keep an eye on violent settlers that kill also innocent Palestinians in the West Bank. Illegal settlements is against international law. United Nations have condemned it many, many times. And once again, if Europe doesn't back international law and the UN, then we are lost. We are among those that founded those principles and the United Nations. So we will do as much as possible for a peaceful future for the Palestinian in a Palestinian state. That's why we recognize Palestine in last May, together with Slovenia, with Ireland and with Norway. And that's why also we think that this is the best for everyone, including the people of Israel and their own security.
What do you think of the trend, let's say, of Donald Trump so far? Again, Palestine, Gaza should be wiped out. Canada should become the 51st state, demanding to take over Greenland.
There are two things. One, I think we are spending too much time about what someone else says or thinks. What's really important for me is what we are going to do, how united Europeans we are going to be, how united we are going to be around our values. And our values are very clear. Equal sovereignty of states, territorial integrity, searching for peace. War cannot be a way of settling disputes among states. All those are principles that we have created ourselves and that we must back. So let's not talk or think so much about what someone else. We have no control on what other presidents of other countries say or will do, but we can decide what we will do.
Does Greenland have cover from the EU's perspective because it is an autonomous part of Denmark?
For me, Greenland is part of the territorial integrity of Denmark, which is a member of the European Union.
And also NATO?
It's a part of territorial integrity of Denmark to all purposes.
Another piece, of course, is NATO. And, you know, before Trump became president, everybody was concerned about the impact he would have on NATO, whether he would remove the United States from it, whether collective security was going to be as strong. He has singled out Spain because Spain hasn't met the 2% spending of GDP yet. I mean, how will you respond to that? Because he's not only saying 2%, I mean, he's saying that's a floor. 5% is actually what he wants now.
There are several things. First, there are 10 countries that are members of NATO that haven't reached the 2%. And each country has the right to think that the threshold should be X or Y. But that's the opinion of one country. The opinion of the United States is a very important opinion for me. It's a very important ally. But the decision about the spending in NATO or whatever other decision around NATO, we take it together, all the members in the Atlantic Council. And it's okay to look at the percentage of the defense expenditure, but that's not the only thing we should look to see the engagement with what's really important. And it's not only the finance, but it's the commitment with the Euro-Atlantic security. We should look at absolute figures, and the absolute figures says that Spain is the 8th net contributor to the defense within NATO. If we don't look at the percentage, but the real, actual money that we are spending.
But do you think that you will be able to still increase it to make the sort of at least over 2% benchmark? Because it's obviously something that he's quite particular about.
We have been increasing in the last year our defense expenditure, and we had made very clear that in 2029 we will be at 2%. It's our issue, but it's also the issue of 9 other NATO members.
The problem is that it hinges, Ukraine's support from the United States sort of hinges on NATO member states paying their dues.
we are among the countries that have been more supportive of Ukraine from all points of view, humanitarian, political and diplomatic, and also providing equipment, military equipment to Ukraine for the defense of its sovereignty.
In relation to Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky is obviously saying that security guarantees are vital in some way, whether that's membership of NATO, for there to be any reasonable, just peace negotiations. Because obviously we know if the war ends and there's a frozen conflict, Russia can just resume it at any point if Ukraine doesn't have security guarantees. What do you think they could look like? Do you support Ukrainian membership of NATO for at least the unoccupied territories?
It's not a matter of what Spain thinks or not, it's what we have decided. That a long time ago, we decided that the future of NATO one day should be with Ukraine, and the future of Ukraine should be in NATO. But at this moment, there is not an accession request at the table that is being dealt with. We are talking about a country that is at war at this very moment. And what we are doing is to give bilateral security guarantees. Spain signed with President Zelensky a security guarantee agreement. And meanwhile, what we must make sure is that Ukraine wins this war, because losing this war means that Ukraine will disappear. That's what is at stake, and therefore the European security would be threatened.
Okay, José Manuel Albares, the Spanish Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you.